Thank you. Well, I hope to encourage you today as apologists with my story. See, I was that kid. I was the kid, you all have a kid like this in your youth group. The kid who studied the Bible as early as she could read and write. The kid who loved Jesus with all her heart. The kid who went on every mission trip her youth group made available. The kid who led Bible studies on the campus of her Christian high school. The kid that you thought would be fine, right? You would look at me and say, she will be fine. She will never doubt her faith. We don't have to worry about her. And for the most part, that was true. I didn't have a lot of doubts growing up. In fact, I wouldn't even encounter real skeptical arguments against what I believed until I was an adult. I grew up in a Christian home with parents who modeled for me a very genuine faith. It was the type of Christianity that was very real. My parents regularly prayed with us. They studied the Bible with us. They repented to us and in front of us. And to add to that, they had us involved in street ministry. We regularly worked the soup lines at the Fred Jordan Mission on weekends in LA where we lived. And with my dad, we'd go out on the streets of Hollywood Boulevard in New York City and we'd share the gospel with people on the street. So I regularly saw the power of the gospel at work in people's lives. I watched the lives of drug addicts and prostitutes be transformed by the gospel. So I can't say that I had a blind faith. My faith was informed, but it was intellectually weak and untested, and I didn't even know it. After high school, I spent several years doing some inner city work in New York before going into the Christian music business for a while, and it was such a great experience in Zoe Girl. We got to play Madison Square Garden and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was just one of those experiences, one of those adventures that everybody dreams about, and it was so cool. But I think being a part of that kind of shielded me from a lot of the skepticism that was coming into culture. I was in a bit of a Christian bubble. And so after Zoe Girl came off the road, and we all just were getting married and started to have kids, I found myself at home with a new baby. And I was invited to a local church to do some music. And so my husband and I went to this church and I sang, and we just felt this connection with this church. We loved the sense of community we found with like-minded believers. We loved the intellectual approach to the sermons that we heard. Neither my husband or I had ever been exposed to that, to somebody just so calmly speaking and thinking so deeply about the scriptures they were teaching. So at this church, I was invited by the pastor to be a part of a very small sort of study and discussion class. This was the class that would leave me walking with a limp. This was the class that permanently embedded the voice of the skeptic into my mind every time I would open my Bible from that moment forward, because it was in the context of this class that the pastor revealed that he was actually an agnostic. He called himself a hopeful agnostic. He hoped Christianity was true. But over the course of 4 months, he began to bring in skeptical argument after skeptical argument against everything I'd ever believed and treasured about God. Everything I'd ever believed about Jesus, and specifically everything that I had believed about the Bible, this book that I had based my entire life on. He was able to, with logic and with philosophy and things I didn't even know about, he was able to knock the legs out from under it. And it sent me into a crisis of faith. Many of you have seen the movie A Perfect Storm. At the end of that movie, there's this massive just coming together of these 3 different storms out on the ocean, and you see these giant waves crashing and this storm swirling overhead. And if you look very closely, you can see the face of just this tiny little human face gasping for air, trying to keep his head above water. If you haven't seen the movie, I probably should have said spoiler alert. They all die. But that's what it felt like. I was that face just up above the water going, I need air. And I begged the God, I would sing hymns into the darkness, begging the God that I hoped was there to send me a lifeboat because I was drowning in doubt. And so one day I was in my car and I was tuning the radio and I heard this man's voice. And he was addressing all of the claims that the pastor had brought up in this class, one by one. And he was doing it so calmly and so kindly. And he had this sort of refined gentleman's voice with an Indian accent. And so I discovered that this man was Ravi Zacharias. And so I downloaded Ravi's app and I began to listen every single day. And then one day I heard an advertisement for Southern Evangelical Seminary and their national conference. And guess what? They had an app. So I downloaded that app and I began to listen to the lectures from this conference, some of them multiple times. And God began to use apologetics to save my faith. God began to send me lifeboats. He sent me lifeboats in the form of Frank Turek and Hugh Ross and J. Warner Wallace, Greg Kokel, all these great ministries. But I would say the captain of that ship, the one steering that ship, was Dr. Norm Geisler. I discovered the work of Dr. Norm Geisler, and it was through him and through his books and his lectures and his teachings that I learned to think critically about my faith. I learned how to build a case for the reliability of the Bible that I had based my entire life on. And it was through his ministry and through the ministry of so many others, that faces that I see out in this crowd today, that God used as lifeboats in my life. And so I had a really cool full circle moment about 3 years ago. I got to come to the SES National Conference in 2016. I came all by myself. And I went to all the different breakouts, and it was just so exciting and so fun. And I thought, if I just get to meet Norm Geisler, that would be so great. I had just started a new blog, and I had some technical issues with my website. So I decided to take one of the breakout sessions and just sit in the hallway and try to figure out what was wrong with my website. So I'm typing away, and I hear this motorized hum, and it's getting closer and closer to me, sort of like a buzz. And I look up, and it's Dr. Norm Geisler on an electric scooter, 10 feet in front of me. And we make eye contact, and I froze. I didn't say anything. So I look down at my computer, and I'm processing, thinking, just introduce yourself. Tell him how much your ministry meant. Tell him how God used him as a lifeboat in your life and for your faith. And by the time I pulled myself together, I looked up, and he had just scooted on by, and he was gone. So I never got to meet him. I never got to tell him how God used him as a lifeboat in my life. But I wanted to tell that story specifically to encourage you that as you send lifeboats out into the world through conversations you have with people at home, at church, through teaching a class at your church, or writing an online article, or even those of you who are writing books and have major ministries, you're sending lifeboats out every time you do that. And you may never know who gets in one of your lifeboats. Norm Geisler never knew I got in his lifeboat. And you may never know. So when it seems like no one's listening, when it seems like an uphill battle to get Christians to care about apologetics, when you present the idea to your church to teach a class and everybody just wants to sit around and talk about their feelings, please stay encouraged. Don't grow weary in doing good. And know that every time you speak truth out into the world, through whatever platform you have, you're sending a lifeboat out, and someone like me might find it and might climb in, and you might help save someone's faith through what you're doing. So thank you.
AlisaChilders.com. AlisaChilders.com. Alisa does very good work dealing with progressive or liberal Christianity, so check out her blog there. Well, if